Okay, and we are live. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our today's session of The Midpoint. My name is Moritz Brenker. I'm a CAS program manager, and I'm representing the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung today. We are more than delighted that so many people dropping in for today's discussion, and I'm looking very much forward to a fruitful and exciting debate with excellent speakers. The Midpoint is a project that we recently started in South Africa. Our main objective is to encourage South Africa's political center and provide a platform for proficient and substantive discussions. All our online debates are based on academic publications, which can be downloaded amongst other material on our homepage. Further information regarding that will be shared during the webinar in the chat box function. The Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is a German political foundation, and we are active in more than 120 countries worldwide. Since 1982, we are in South Africa, nowadays with offices in Cape Town and Johannesburg. Our work is based on the foundation's main principles, which are freedom, justice, and solidarity. One of our primary goals is promoting democracy, given today's discussion a very prevailing and essential topic. Today, the 26th of March, is an important day since it marks 1 year of lockdown. The last year has been throughout different and challenging. The last year has been a litmus test for South Africa's democracy. Without further ado, I'm handing over to today's moderator, who I'm pretty sure most of you will know, Ferial Haffajee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Moritz. Very happy to be with you today. My big question is, do we still have a political center? But that's, I guess, one for another day. Today, this week is a year since we went into a very hard lockdown. I've been looking at my photos since that time, and our country felt so like Armageddon was about to happen, was about to befall us, like the rest of the world. And it's very important, it's a good week to do a stock take. And to do that, we're joined by two of our country's eminent thinkers, whom I'll introduce. Dr. Ralph Mathekga will present a paper on the topic for us. Ralph, at the end of the year, or the middle of this year, is coming out with a very exciting sounding book, his third, The ANC's Last Decade, which I think could be another debate in this series. Obviously, it follows his books When Zuma Goes and Ramaphosa's Turn. Ralph is currently a policy maker or an analyst with the Liechtenstein-based Geopolitical Intelligence Services. And we all know him from his News 24 columns and from his writing in everything from New York Times, the Washington Post, and Financial Times, and certainly one of our more prescient people who interpret our maladies or our democracy. Then also Laurence Caromba, very well-known lecturer in international relations at the University of Johannesburg. He's currently completing a doctoral research project into a real story of our times, and that's how states use computer hacking and online propaganda to advance their foreign policy interests. Certainly, I think the ANC's next National General Council, which is planned for sometime this year, is very much going to be fought on social media, so vital topic. Ralph, over to you to present your paper to us. Lovely to be with you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ferial, and thanks, colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to give you a sense of the midpoint. We'll talk to you for about 10 minutes, just give you the highlights of what I'm looking at in my paper. The most important thing that I looked at when the lockdown came about, when the corona virus crisis came about, I was quite concerned about how it will influence governance, how it will influence the behavior of the executive. I mean, I was looking at state institutions, and my sense by then was that quite often, I mean, or maybe a common view shared by some is that the center is quite struggling with when it comes to authority. And Ferial mentioned there, is there even a center? I mean, probably we are talking about the multiple center. where I think that we are having at the center of our politics, whatever remains of the center of our politics, the crisis of legitimacy, where policymakers are facing difficulties, corruption, and so forth. They've got challenges when it comes to governance and so forth. So when you look at it, you get a sense that you have at the center of politics this crisis of legitimacy. So when the COVID-19 hit, I started wearing a different lens. I said to myself that I want to observe how management of the COVID-19, which has elevated executives to very, very high level, has given the executive what you can call an instant legitimacy, where people were quite concerned, people were quite fearful. What happened? The virus came about. People did not see something of this nature, and a lot of citizens in many democracies deferred to the executive, quite more than we have ever seen in recent times. And the executive certainly enjoyed that legitimacy. But at the backdrop of that was the crisis of legitimacy against which the executive actually entered into this crisis. So my view then was that how is this executive, this newly found executive legitimacy play out? I actually started terming it executive indulgence in one of the opinion articles I wrote earlier on this, where my view was that I'm seeing executive exuberance, some enthusiasm on the side of the executive that they can do a lot of things. They can go it alone. The National Coronavirus Council was put together as an executive council as well. I mean, I interpret this thing very, very closely to a point where even the idea of a command council had a meaning to me, that it is a command, almost like a center where command will be issued as the response is being meted to this COVID-19. For me, I saw there that emergence of the executive, and a lot of people deferring actually to the executive, not just in South Africa, but also across the world. My concern was that I remember talking to a journalist saying that, look, I mean, this is the very same government that couldn't deliver water 3 months ago. Now it is being given this executive deference so that it can respond to this. I hope it does not end up in a situation where there are a lot of questions around governance. And I think that it was just a window that took place up to a certain extent where people started questioning after the first few months of the management of the lockdown. If you look at the month of April, you comb the media in the month of April, you look at a lot of reports last year starting to come out around what is happening with the management of the lockdown. And in my view, you start seeing the national maybe consensus on the lockdown beginning to attain or take that critical attitude where people begin to ask, you know, the measures and so forth. And at that point, I do think one thing that I point out on the side of government in the paper is to say that where government had an opportunity to err on the side of less interference with civil liberties, it did not do that. I mean, there are certain areas where I've seen government, and I mentioned a simple example of the flip-flops on how they could have affected the fight against COVID, that people could not buy the flip-flops in the shops. I mean, when you look at it scientifically, there is no reason, there is a lot of doubt about the efficacy of such a measure. But if you look at its impact on the civil liberties, it's so severe that I ask myself that if you have doubt on the efficacy of certain measures, why is it that you tend to be going into the most intrusive measures when it comes to the regulation? This is where I started questioning the extent of this executive indulgence, saying that it seems to be going overboard. There seems to be beneath maybe the underlying feeling among our politicians that the nation just has to be put on path. I mean, you know, the lingo around this scope and donor, the militarization of the response to the COVID-19 in South Africa, where the police and those departments were mostly high-ranking in the response. So when I look at that, the legitimacy started to crumble with the experience of government. But I think around that time, President Ramaphosa, I think he emerged above, or tried to emerge above the party, whereby his response to the scandal was much quicker than what we have seen, signing proclamation for the Special Investigative Unit and so forth, almost losing control of the management of the system. However, saying that, look, at least I need to restore credibility by demonstrating that we can at least go after wrongdoing. This is where I think you start seeing other players being allowed in the middle of the lockdown. You see NGOs coming in. Initially, it was almost like a government-driven maneuver without a lot from the civil society. And again, no one has been here before, but what I thought that there was, again, I call it an executive intelligence. In some areas, it was not necessary. And I know that in some areas, legally, government was standing on firm ground legally, but not necessarily when it comes to the culture of human rights, or maybe where one can say you defer, at least in the interest of saying maintenance of those civil liberties. And I think where are we now? The biggest thing I want to finish with is, what are the tailwinds of this lockdown on governance? What will happen? One of the characteristics of the lockdown was the response through a centralized system where the National Command Council, of course, in consultation with other spheres of government, but you can see other spheres of government, your provinces and your local government, almost came up as having nothing to do, nothing more substantive to contribute to this. There wasn't much of a stake cut for them at initial level at that. Perhaps maybe because of the trust at national level, my fear has always been that we tend to be overstating capacity at national level. But I think beyond this, it is the attitude of rapid response, arranging government institution in a way that you are gearing it for rapid crisis response, essentially evading accountability. That is the concern that I have, because we are going to remain with the reconstruction of what has happened under the lockdown for a while. There will be policy tensions around the health, the extent to which the state should be involved in the health, your education. All this inequality that has been laid bare will certainly create policy conflict regarding the extent to which the state get involved. And there seems to be more yearning towards centralization. I mean, I've pointed in the paper that there seems to be, the shift towards the district system of the municipalities. But also, again, you hear about a rumored paper coming out about a coordinated implementation plan under a central government, DECO, and so forth. So one way or another, there will be more attempt at trying to further the rapid response system to policy and policy crisis. The problem with that is that essentially it has a problem with governance, and it gives a sense of urgency. I mean, we're going to conglomerate a few departments under one. We're quickly downstream, down spheres of government. Doesn't matter what the province or local government, this is a development prerogative, has to be implemented as a question of priority. The general flow of the bureaucracy and the functioning of the bureaucracy might be impacted due to that kind of rapid response system or the agency type of response created under the lockdown. This is what I think we are going to remain with quite long as democracies. A lot of behaviors and attitudes that are going to impact upon the institutions, that will impact upon intergovernmental relations, the devolution of responsibilities across the three spheres of government. I think that is where civil society organizations, I think a lot of work is going to be done with regard to that, to make sure that we do not delve into what in the paper I call development dictatorship, which might just be enticed in the post-lockdown environment or the post-COVID environment. I think I tried to manage to fit it within that 10 minutes, Ferial. That's all from my side, the highlight points of the paper.
Thank you very much, Ralph. That was great. So executive exuberance, development, dictatorship. I cannot wait to ask you questions about these things. Just want to say hello to some people who've joined us. Londiwe, good morning. Michael and Sinet, good morning. Craig Bailey, Hilton Smith, lovely questions. We'll get to them. And Craig Bailey says, we tend to overstate the capacity at national level, which I'd love to talk about. But Laurence Caromba, over to you to give your responses to Ralph, and very welcome.
Thanks very much. And Ralph, I really enjoyed the paper. Let me just respond to a few points. I can't deal with everything, obviously, but just a couple of ideas that I thought were thought-provoking. And I mean, I suppose the main thing that I thought about is just this underlying kind of political, really philosophical idea of kind of what is the balance of rights and responsibilities between governments and citizens during the context of an emergency, and I think this is kind of the fundamental question that we're all grappling with here. And I'll maybe say, kind of my starting point for thinking about this question is that I do think it's reasonable to say that there are certain situations, when you have a crisis, an emergency, think of, a disease pandemic or a war or something like that. There are legitimate situations where government is justified in taking on extraordinary powers, and also in taking away the freedoms of citizens in ways that would not be justified during normal life. But I suppose maybe the most famous historical example of this, I guess, is in the old Roman Republic, they used to appoint a dictator for a year during a period of crisis or something like that. But even in the old Roman world, which is like obviously not a democracy in the way that we would consider it today, that was still an office that came with limits, right? It was time limited. It was a military command. It wasn't just a license to do whatever you feel like. And I think that today as well, it points to something important, which is that yes, there might be these extraordinary situations where governments have to take on these extraordinary powers, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that governments do have obligations and duties, right? And we can discuss what those obligations were and whether they were met during the COVID response. I mean, my thinking would be that it's important that government, firstly, only uses its extraordinary powers to pursue policies that are directly related to the crisis at hand, right? So it's not acceptable for governments to use emergency powers to pursue policy goals that are unrelated to the emergency, even if those policies might be good things in their own terms. And I think that's an important point. And also that emergency powers need to be time limited, and also that emergency powers need to be exercised in a way that I think is compassionate and rational, and responsible, basically. And for what it's worth, I think that objectively, the way that South African government exercised its powers during the lockdown, I think did not meet that standard. A couple of other things that I found were interesting. Something that you didn't mention in your initial remarks, but something that I picked up is this issue of the relationship between science as an institution, and scientists as individuals, and government and policymakers. And to my mind, this is a really, really important point. It goes beyond just the narrow issue of COVID-19. I mean, as a society, as a species, really, we face enormous, complex problems that will really require scientific knowledge to solve. So think of disease pandemics, public health in general, think of climate change, think of things like cybersecurity, for example. These are all issues that require sort of specialized epistemic knowledge from scientists and researchers and experts. And I think that we have a real sort of cultural disconnect between the way governments, and I think especially the way that government operates in South Africa, versus the institutional culture of science, right? Because government culture is inherently, especially in South Africa, it's consensus building, right? I mean, how often are we told, for example, that there are no factions in the ANC? Like the one thing that every ANC faction can agree on is that there's no ANC factions. And we compare that desire to sort of present a unified front versus the scientific culture, where, I mean, anyone who's ever presented at an academic conference or something like that would know, it's fiercely self-critical, right? If you disagree with someone, then you stand up and you say so. And I think that we saw this in South Africa with things like the Ministerial Advisory Committee with Dr. Glenda Gray coming out and criticizing certain government decisions, and government really, I think, unfortunately, trying to silence her and saying, no, you're a scientist, you're part of the Ministerial Advisory Committee, you need to voice your objections in secret, in private, not open, which is really antithetical to the way that scientists are used to operating. And I think, unfortunately, government needs to just sort of appreciate that where science gets its strength and its power from is actually in its capacity for self-criticism, right? Like the reason why we take scientists more seriously is not because they're so inherently smart that they always get things right the first time, right? They don't. But where science gets its epistemic strength from is its ability to correct mistakes when things go wrong and need to be changed later on. And so if you want the knowledge and the power that science can give you, unfortunately, just sort of taking the first scientific model that you get and say apply that and not put that model out there or that data out there for other scientists to critique and correct isn't really sort of doing science correctly, right? So I think that those are sort of two big points that stood out from me from your paper that I found interesting.
Thank you very much, Laurence. Really great thoughts there. Now, I look forward to coming back to a few of them. So Ralph, if I may start with a key question that I got as I was reading your paper is, undoubtedly the world has seen authoritarian republics using the cover of COVID to extend that impetus. And I'm thinking here of the last days of Trump, of Modi in India, of Xi in China, of Turkey, and closer to home of Rwanda and even of Zimbabwe. So we saw leaders in those countries really using the cover of the pandemic to make huge changes to the democratic world, and I think one that puts us into very tenuous circumstances. And I would argue to you that that wasn't our experience here. Yes, when the national coronavirus command council was started, you saw the hawks in the cabinet, like your police minister Bheki Cele, like your transport minister Fikile Mbalula, even like Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the cooperative governance minister, and really the queen of the disaster regime, loving this idea of an NCC. The NCC says there will be no walking of dogs, etc. But what I loved about our country is that impetus was very quickly mediated by civil society and, in fact, by the democratic wing of the ANC itself. So I guess my question to you is are you fair in your criticism?
I think it's a very good observation, Ferial, because I also observed Rwanda, I've observed Uganda as well.
Yes.
The crisis that they've had. And if you compare those countries with South Africa and you try to put them par on par, they're actually almost incomparable. I mean, South Africa is nowhere near what you have seen in those countries when it comes to intervention. But one thing in South Africa, Ferial, though, this is exactly the problem even on the continent. I mean, if someone gives you a survey, I've done a lot of surveys myself. Sometimes they give me a problem. I take the same survey, I put it in Botswana and I put it in South Africa, for example. And you are asking me a question that will have to do in the context of South Africa.
Okay.
Was it in line with, because you are pointing to a very critical issue you are saying to me that give me a little bit of a context, because I'm throwing in this comparison in a way that you can easily compare it with Uganda and so forth and end up with a very, very unfair kind of result. But in terms of the culture in South Africa, I'll give you an example. I think you and I, we know that government cannot on its own provide the feeding scheme without the NGOs, because we have the culture of co-governance in South Africa, where a slighter deviation will raise the needle much higher than it is the case with some deviation in Uganda on something that maybe in South Africa you can't even imagine here.
Sure.
So why I'm saying this is that when I looked at the initial response, that sense of co-governance was gone. And for me, for some reason, Ferial, I don't understand. It's the belief, the sudden belief by government that it has this instant capacity, which came from nowhere, because from where I know, you cannot police without community policing forum. They were shut down in the earlier phase of the lockdown. I mean, sure. I drove around in some other areas where I could talk to people, and you find out that that gap by the NGOs was so, that lack of co-function, co-governance. I don't want to say co-governance. Let me just say cooperation in terms of providing a lot of public services. It was not there anymore. And the lack of consultation in South Africa, it's so deviated from the normal way of doing things that it worried me that I think within this context, it stand out as something that is of concern. And again, it comes at the time that you look at the political differences within the party. You look at the party also coming out with democratic centralism. You know, yes. You take that within that context, you end up with I think, a different picture. But I do accept that it's nowhere near comparable to those countries that you mentioned on the continent.
Thank you. But not that we must ever stop being vigilant, and the NCCC really enjoyed that power until I'd argue it was mediated by court cases, by a very loud civil society response. Laurence, coming to you in a second, I just want to read some really interesting comments and questions to think about, Ralph, for you. From Simpiwe Mashlanyana. COVID-19 has really showed us how South Africa's governance is extremely poor. Apart from looting of funds, GBV on the rise, many other issues. Do you, Ralph Mathekga, honestly think President Cyril Ramaphosa will finish his first term? So has COVID-19 been kind to the president? Or will he not even see out a second term, as our colleague seems to ask? Quickly from Joe Mavuso, government was forced to declare a state of emergency. Actually, Joe, it was a state of national disaster. They're quite different things. A situation of national danger or disaster in which a government suspends the normal constitutional procedures in order to regain control. So the government's empowered to be able to put through policies to keep its society safe. Laurence, perhaps you can speak to that. But what I was quite keen to explore with you is what I found vital this time around, unlike the last public health crisis of AIDS, was when government issued and marginalized, criticized, and brought in a parallel scientist forum to extend its AIDS denialism. This time, scientists were front and center the response. Isn't that something that should be given credit? And do you think it lays some foundations for policy, kind of evidence-based policy making and execution?
I mean, I very much hope
question.
So. And I do take your point. It definitely is a significant improvement compared to the AIDS crisis. But like I said, though, I still see that culture gap, between consensus-seeking culture and sort of critical scientific culture as being something that's really hard to get around. And it's interesting because, maybe we could say as well, what are there responsibilities? I mean, I was focusing more on the government side, the responsibility of government to accommodate itself to scientific culture. We could debate, is there a sort of obligation for scientists who want to impact on public policy to accommodate themselves to government culture as well? And that's something we can think about. But my major point was just that sort of, if you want, like I say, if you want the gains of science, you have to accept the self-critical aspect, because that's really where it comes from. But in response to Joe's point, and I think I would maybe sort of agree with something that Ralph mentioned earlier, which is that a legal framework isn't always the best way of thinking about these things. Just because a policy meets the legal standards as something that the government can do legally doesn't mean that this is the way that you should be doing things. And the whole issue of the sort of the militarization and the securitization of the government's COVID response is something that really worried me at the time, and really continues to worry me. That was sort of the first instinct of political elites when faced with a crisis, was to sort of grab onto that weapon or that tool of the armed forces and the security services, and use that as their instrument, even if that instinct was ultimately mediated later on by civil society and the court system. I do think it is worrying that was the initial tendency. And in academia, the sort of one of the major ways of thinking about security issues over the past couple of decades has been this idea of human security, right? Which is this idea that things like disease, pandemics, and maybe even social issues like poverty and things like that should also be considered in their way security issues. And I think that it's a well-intentioned idea, right? This idea that we should put money into medicine instead of the military is kind of the thinking. But I do also think that there's a real danger to take things like public health issues and securitize and militarize those issues. And we've seen that in other parts of the world, even in the context of things like the war on drugs, for example. You take something that's an issue of criminal justice or ideally of public health, and turn it into a military problem to solve with armed forces. It leads to bad outcomes, right? It leads to human rights abuses. It leads to death. And there's a reason why, the military, almost by definition, is trained to fight and destroy its adversary on the battlefield and to occupy territory. It really shouldn't be a surprise that if the government chooses to deploy the military in sort of the streets of South Africa to police the population, that it's going to cause problems with human rights and with violence. And I'm really it makes me really nervous when we see those sorts of decisions taken, and especially when the government then issues statements like, I think that the defense minister said, that the South African people have responsibility not to taunt the SANDF, kind of flips it around and almost makes it seem like it's the citizens' fault if their human rights are abused because they were sort of provoking the people in charge. And I do think that's a worrying development that happened.
Because we all, and Ralph pays homage to the death of Colin Scosa in Alex. He became the kind of symbol of the jackboot, which was the initial response of both the army and the police. But what's not well known, and I think is a real work of investigative journalism waiting to be done, is that 9 other people were so killed in the course of those initial hard jackboot days of policing the lockdown, the securitized response, which again then, because IPID came in, because people made their voices heard, you saw the police kind of dialing back. But that was the first response is, for me, a great concern, and we saw it again at play in the policing of the student protests last week, where somebody died so very tragically. So a question to both of you, and I think a vital one for the discussion at hand, is from Wilhelm Janse van Rensburg. He says, your views on the role that Parliament played or should have played as a counterweight to executive dominance during the lockdown. Ralph, you want to take that one?
That was quite sad. I do mention explicitly that actually the Democratic Alliance proposed a parliamentary oversight committee before we could even have the phrase PPE scandal. Before that, the DA went on that. We watched carefully Ferial there, and the president enjoyed such an executive authority that he did not even have to put much effort to pour water on that. I remember it did not even grab so much on about the headline. And by that time, there were 2 types of people in South Africa, probably. Probably there were just a few lunatics and everybody else who supported government. It appears that it was like that classification. Ferial, I'll tell you, I listen to radio on a critical basis all the time.
Yes.
I was listening to one of the top stations I don't mention, the top station. I had someone almost editorializing after the announcement of the lockdown. And when I hear someone who is editorializing like the president is doing this great job, and my cynicism as an academic, I am cynical, Laurence, you mentioned there, call me a professional cynical. I was very doubtful that so much power suddenly, we are not asking questions, we are all gripped in this fear. I remember, I can even tell you the first few articles to start coming out, your Daily Maverick, your News 24, people, I can tell you the first articles start coming out that, wait a minute, where are the numbers here and everything. So for some reason, we were gripped by this fear. Questions were not asked, but sadly, our politicians indulged during that moment. I'm not saying they broke the law, but they did overindulge.
That's really interesting. Laurence, to the question of parliamentary oversight in this year, did it Did it die? Was it replaced by the family meeting? What's your view? Huh?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Wilhelm is probably better positioned to actually answer his own question, because I know he has experience. He has experience working with Parliament. But I mean, so look, I think there's two things, right? The one is that just from an institutional perspective, we know that Parliament, as a counterweight to the executive, has historically been quite weak in South Africa, and I mean, my view is that that has a lot to do with the way that Parliament is set up, the fact that we have a proportional party list-based system, so political parties can really choose who they want to be in Parliament, and so those are usually the same political elites who control the executive branch. So it's no surprise that they all sort of tend to agree with each other, and we don't really see a lot of cases in South Africa of government legislation ever being defeated in parliamentary votes. And then, of course, in South Africa, it became more difficult just as a logistical matter during the COVID-19, that when you can't meet in person, the pandemic itself sort of frustrated the operation of the sort of checks and balances which are normally meant to guard against government abuses. And it's also kind of well, it's an interesting problem that we'll have to maybe think about for maybe for the next time that there's a national emergency, how can we strengthen and improve institutions so that doesn't happen again.
But I wonder, did the official opposition and the other parties, did they rise to the occasion of the big issues of the role of Parliament and insisting even on its virtual convening early in the days and picking up on the real epidemiological questions of the time and the responses? What I instead saw was political spectacle, where John Steenhuisen's big moment was going to go and have a haircut when hairdressers were still closed, and other populist measures like that. So I wonder if they protected that vital sphere of people's power, Ralph. And if you could just maybe answer Simpiwe's question about how did Cyril Ramaphosa do through this? Huh? Will he last?
Ferial, I don't think that political parties, they really, I don't think they stood to the moment. I don't think they played their role as it was required. I mean, earlier on, you had the EFF saying they're supporting hard lockdown and they were just supporting the president, almost like supporting a football team. Not very clear as to why. I mean, what are the substantive factors here? It was almost like, for some reason, I felt like the EFF was saying, we're just supporting everything else. Once you fail, we are going to be after you. So it was almost like that. And as far as the DA is concerned as well, they also did not do so well, Ferial. I mean, they ended up just opposing things. They ended up just picking some of the regulations and taking a hard position on some of the regulation. I empathize with them as a party that uses a lot of the provincial platform as where they exist the mostly, because one thing about this lockdown is that it's almost subverted subnational government to the national sphere of government. So you could see them picking that they wanted to say more and so forth. But if I were to pick at individuals within this, I mean, if you ask me about an individual, I'll say Alan Winde of the Western Cape. I mean, if it were someone else in that position, he would have escalated issues 1 million times with the National Command Council. Yes. But I really saw him there de-escalating, at some point being asked if he knows what plan was being rolled out in the Nyasna area. He will say, no, we are waiting to be consulted. So I think I've seen leadership there on his side, Alan Winde of the Western Cape. I mean, he did not play to the gallery at all, and he did not play party politics in his leadership of this. And I think the Western Cape faced the pandemic, the first wave, much earlier. So he did not come out badly. But the question as to whether will President Ramaphosa survive? I mean, Ferial, correct me here if I'm wrong. No one has ever lost their jobs in South Africa because of the way South Africa's lockdown has been managed. No one. I mean, no one.
Alfia, wait a lost their jobs because of PPE, Bandile Masuku, for example.
Oh no, that's when you become an extreme liability that you cannot be saved. But to be honest, no one has lost their job because of the decision being questionable in relation to the management of the lockdown. Even the ministers that were in denial about the lockdown, issuing videos earlier on, they were not really sanctioned. So will President Ramaphosa survive this lockdown? Will he if you look at the management of the lockdown, one would say he should be critically evaluated. But I have a sense, Ferial, that we forgive easily as South Africans. We move on. And for me, looking at it, I have a feeling that it will take a great deal of work by the opposition to take the management of the lockdown into an election issue through which they can begin to try to punish the ANC. It takes a lot of work, but one thing for sure is that probably they will have a new scandal by the time the elections hit. They wouldn't have to worry about it.
Not at all. It is interesting to me that, well, I think the president started off quite well in his response, but I think it's weakened, and that the clear governance messes on the vaccine could count harshly against him. So question for you, Laurence, from TK Pue Dubelang. TK, thank you for the discussion. He says, I'm interested in the notion that NGOs are a sign of a strong democracy in state. Are they not instead a sign of weak state capacity?
That's a really interesting question to think about. Yeah, I suppose you could argue it either way. But generally, I think if we look at first of all, if we look at sort of strong established democracies in the world, one of the common factors seems to be that they do have strong civil society, and that's kind of it's almost universal to the point that that's one of the ways that political scientists kind of test how well consolidated a country's democracy is. Is the government confident enough to allow NGOs and to allow civil society actors to exist in that space without trying to take over all of the power, try to hold on to all of the power for itself. But then the converse is true. So I do think that the question, it hits on an important thing, which is when we see states kind of outsourcing key aspects of government, of government or governance to non-state actors, then that can definitely be a sign that the government is too weak to fulfill its core responsibilities. And here I would point to things like, if we look at a very fragile state like the DRC, for instance, for many decades, their entire education system was basically run not by the government but by the Catholic Church. So that can be definitely, when there are those core governance functions that you allow NGOs to take over, that might be a sign of weak capacity. Now, if we look at South Africa in the case of COVID, maybe it's worthwhile pivoting this discussion to this debate over what's happening right now, which is the whole issue of vaccine policy and vaccine rollout. We've been talking about the lockdown. Presumably, this is how it's going to end, and we're seeing this contestation now of basically who gets to deliver the vaccines that brings this whole chapter of our history hopefully to a conclusion. And what is the role? Should it be centralized by the government? Is there a role for civil society or provinces or private business corporations and so on? And these are the types of issues that I would say that there might be a legitimate role for non-state actors, that I don't think we should see it automatically as a sign of weakness if some of these functions are carried out by actors other than the state, is my personal opinion there.
And how would you see the role of the Solidarity Fund? Question for either of you, which has stepped in at key moments, both with skills, but also with lots of money. For example, government simply didn't have the money to pay the first deposit for the vaccines.
Yeah, I think that the Solidarity Fund has shown how a multi-stakeholder approach is always better than a unilateralist approach. I mean, there are certain capacities that maybe will no longer inherently be found, or will no longer just be found in government. They can be unlocked when government work with other partners and so forth. So I don't believe that civil society, its existence, it's a demonstration of weakness. And my view is that civil society, NGOs are just part of civil society. Civil society is quite broad. It includes the church, includes labor, includes even organized business. Some of it organizes itself in that way as well. So I do think that multi-stakeholder approach works well. The Solidarity Fund did very well, but also, you know, in using the network that exists within business that government does not have, and just the efficiency that exists in business as well that government should benefit from.
Thank you. A question from Michael, and I pronounce your name properly. Senate, an important function of a democracy is accountability. We lack strict vertical and horizontal accountabilities. Laurence, want to take that one?
Well, I wouldn't. Interesting. Look, I think that there are definitely non-state institutions that have done a good job of holding the government accountable. And you know, I would look to the media. I think we've seen extremely good investigative journalism during this period, and you know, we've seen civil society. I would agree with Ralph, step up and play a positive role. But I do agree also that in terms of the horizontal accountability, in terms of you know, government really setting clear standards for you know, you're basically setting standards and best practices and for the bureaucracies that are under its control, and really like holding its own bureaucracies and civil service to account when it doesn't meet those standards, I think is something that we really lack. I can't remember who made the point in this discussion before about nobody ever seems to lose their job for major public policy failures in South Africa. And yeah, I do think that is a real problem. You know, we compare this to, you know, certain countries like Japan, for example, where it's not unheard of for a cabinet minister to resign. If something happens, you know, maybe 2 or 3 levels of hierarchy underneath them, there's even if the minister had nothing themselves to do with that, well, there's still this assumption that you were in charge of this organizational structure that allowed this problem to happen. And that's really not something that we see in South Africa happen ever.
No, unfortunately not, even though we keep getting promised that this is an era of accountability. Ralph, can we go to open-toed sandals? I must say that when I saw those things that Woolworths saying you can't buy rotisserie chicken, but you can buy other chicken. Then I went to Sportsman's Warehouse and you could buy some balls, but not others. You went to Pick and Pay and the gift cards and the gymming section was closed off. It really felt like Ibrahim Patel had lost his marbles. So from Zaid Jadwat, I was not aware of the the point of executive indulgence is interesting. If I may ask, why would the South African government want to engage in such a far-reaching indulgence? Also, I believe the need for tight measures, like the example you gave about the sandals, may have been justified because you had to keep entire supply chains restricted, and you had to keep others open, and you had to move people in and out of retail sections or shops quite quickly. What's your view, Ralph?
I mean, I understand the justification, but imagine, Ferial, you are there, you're buying bed linen, and within an arm's reach, there is a curtain that is blocked out with a red tape. You can't buy it.
I thought it was so stupid, to be honest.
I mean, exactly, you're already there. And for me, when I looked at the whole thing, I said to myself that, I mean, this is just indulgence. I mean, this will not achieve anything. And but it worried me because the underlying belief is that when in doubt, trample upon civil liberties. I mean, it should be the last resort to trample upon those civil liberties. So the way in which I saw that coming out, it quite worried me. And again, Ferial, you know, what I'm talking about, this executive indulgence, it comes from a deep-seated feeling from some of our politicians that actually consultation is the reason why you have a lackluster policy implementation. I mean, there are some who are not essentially Democrat, who believe that once a party is voted into power, therefore the party has got that exclusive right to go and implement. No one can even go to court and ask and so forth. So there is this part of that is also the belief that says that if government constitutes itself in the form of a rapid response team, that's all it takes. There will certainly be a sense of delivery. But you are going to deliver on the same bureaucracy, the same people. Actually, the only benefit you are going to get is just to protect a few groups from accountability. So this executive indulgence, it comes from the view of people believing they can, on a rapid scale, quickly come up with delivery if everybody else shut up, actually. And it doesn't work that way.
So, Laurence, I wanted to ask you that at some points it felt to me like the instinct towards a Gilead, like a patriarchal, authoritarian state was quite deep in parts of our cabinet, and you saw it expressed in open-toed sandals, but also this thing of the state knows best, and actually it didn't, because what it did in the early days was really harm the move towards online retail. Actually, lots of jobs available there, and it quickly shown how the sector could grow. Do you have a thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely this sort of I don't know, paternalistic social agenda that we saw coming out in terms of, wanting to stop people from smoking cigarettes, wanting to stop people from drinking alcohol, and the thing is, those might be, as I said before, those might be legitimate public policy goals. Like, I'm open to the idea that that South Africa would be better off if, for example, we reduced our national per capita level of alcohol consumption. But if the government believes that that's a worthy public policy goal, then because it clearly has nothing to do with COVID-19, right? It really needs to achieve that public policy goal through the normal legislative process. You need to go out and persuade people and make the case that this is something good, and pass it through the normal way. Not try to sneak in unrelated policy goals through a state of emergency, which I think is clearly what was happening a lot of the time. And in terms of the general, as you say, there were so many regulations that were just, frankly, straight up on the face of it, irrational. From, just even if your only goal is to prevent COVID transmission. So, for example, banning online delivery, as you said, has the effect of forcing people to go to shops instead, where you're much more likely to be infected via aerosol transmission or something like that. Things like the exercise window. I still remember when this exercise window was introduced, and it was announced that, well, we can all exercise, but everyone has to do it in a space
5-kilometer radius.
Yeah, and in the space of a couple of hours. And I thought, well, I remember sitting in front of my TV thinking, well, tomorrow I'm going to go out and everybody is going to be packed onto the sidewalk in close contact with each other, and it's a completely predictable outcome, and that's exactly what happened the next day. And it's interesting to consider why those sorts of decisions were taken. What are the incentives or institutions that sort of drove those kinds of decision making? I'm not sure.
Well, it is sad that we have no access to the minutes of those meetings. It would be a fascinating exercise. Ralph, final question as we head up to the hour and say goodbye. Your views on the role of ideological influences on the holistic economic approach taken to the local pandemic in the context of no balanced democratic oversight. Was it reasonable or democratic to put into place measures that would need to lead to unnecessary economic hardship and class suicide? I guess that was the NIDS CRAM research, which showed people being, social mobility being pushed down. Huh?
Yeah, I mean, Ferial, I think in the earlier months, maybe until June, July last year the economic aspect was not part of the bigger planning by government. I mean, this thing was just surprising. I mean, for some reason, again, Ferial, government just thought it has a lot of money suddenly. I mean, to provide a stimulus of some sorts, and they tried by all means, but we all knew that heading into the COVID, we were already, when experiencing a fiscal crisis, we're already running out of money heading into the COVID. So when you look at it, the economy earlier on was not part of the thinking. And my view here and my observation is that the economy came in through the business sector just lobbying for themselves. I mean, at some point during the lockdown in South Africa, everybody just decided that, hey, I sell alcohol, I've got to make a plan here and lobby. I sell this product, I've got to go. At some point, there were just these multiple cases by different lobby groups challenging government to say, these lockdowns have got this detrimental impact upon us. So I don't think the economy was taken much seriously at the beginning. And sadly, if you see the economic impact of this, if you go to rural areas, you see some of the young men and women who left urban areas and they are not going to make it back because they just can't sustain it.
Yes.
in this. It's so sad that when you hear the figures that this is the official figure of the economic impact, you need to know that is conservative, given what you see out there with your eyes when it comes to the impact on the
Absolutely. I think we're still going to be counting it for many years, if not the next generation. Laurence, final word to you on how you see things playing out over in the next year. We've just come through the first year of the pandemic governance. You don't want a crystal ball, guys?
I think he's muted.
I think you're muted.
Sorry, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think the whole issue of vaccine procurement is obviously going to be the biggest thing going forward, and that's really going to be the key issue. I think that COVID-19 in many ways was a poison chalice for any government that was unlucky to have it happen on its watch, basically. And it's so I mean, one of the things with in terms of the political effects of COVID-19, it hasn't so much strengthened it hasn't so much strengthened the left or the right or populism or so much as it's really just strengthened whoever's in opposition at any given time. So countries that were ruled by the right, we saw switch to the left and vice versa. It's just very, very difficult for any government to actually maintain its popular support. But like I say, I think the vaccines is going to be the crucial national issue on which the success of Ramaphosa's government is ultimately judged, and it's just really, really important to get that public policy challenge right.
Thank you very much. I certainly hope we see those vaccines coming. I'm a little worried that it's way off the government's own schedule. Thank you very much, Moritz and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, for a great discussion. The paper will be available shortly, and a recorded version of the website will be available on the website of the webinar, will be on the website soon. Thank you all for your lovely questions and for joining us today. I hope that you have lovely weekends.
Thank you. Thank you.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
The National Coronavirus Command Council has decided to enforce a nationwide lockdown for 21 days with effect from midnight on Thursday, the 26th of March. This is a decisive measure to save lives of South Africans from infection and save the lives of hundreds of thousands of our people.
In South Africa, the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is active since 1982.
Creates the opportunity for young postgraduate students doing their master's degree.
Und freue mich jetzt außerordentlich hier auf diesem modernen Campus.
to the decline in infections, the country can now ease some of the restrictions on movement and on activity. Cabinet has decided earlier today to move the country from coronavirus alert level 3 to alert level 1.